February 1st, 2003, 9 a.m. Eastern Time, Space Shuttle Columbia was traveling at Mach 18.3, descending through 200,000 feet over Texas on what should have been a routine re-entry. Then, in an instant, sensors began failing, temperature readings spiked impossibly high, and 16 minutes before scheduled landing, Columbia disintegrated across the Texas sky. 7 astronauts lost their lives that morning, but what makes this tragedy especially devastating is that it was entirely preventable. The warning signs were there from day one of the mission. Engineers saw the problem, they raised alarms, yet the shuttle was doomed before it ever reached orbit. Welcome back to Project Aerospace. Today we're examining what really happened aboard the Space Shuttle Columbia during STS-107, the mission that became NASA's second catastrophic shuttle loss and exposed systemic failures that had been building for decades. This isn't just about foam insulation and damaged thermal tiles, it's about organizational culture, normalized deviance, scheduled pressure, and the deadly consequences of ignoring engineering warnings. By the end of this video, you'll understand not just how the Columbia was destroyed, but why, and how these lessons changed spaceflight forever. If you're here for deep technical analysis and untold stories behind major aerospace events, hit that subscribe button and that notification bell. Today's investigation goes far beyond what most people know about Columbia, revealing the cascade of decisions and compromises that sealed the crew's fate 16 days before disaster struck. The STS-107 was supposed to be a routine research mission, Columbia's 28th flight and 113th shuttle mission overall. Launched on January 16, 2003 from Kennedy Space Center, the crew of 7 included Mission Commander Rick Husband, pilot Willie McCool, and 5 mission specialists conducting over 80 experiments in material science, fluid physics, and life sciences. Columbia was the oldest orbiter in the fleet, the first to fly back in 1981, but it was still considered a workhorse of NASA's shuttle program. The mission would keep the crew in orbit for 16 days, one of the longest shuttle missions ever, conducting experiments in the SpaceHab research module installed in the payload bay. But 81.7 seconds after liftoff, at 10:39 a.m. Eastern Time, something went catastrophically wrong. High-speed cameras capturing the launch sequence recorded a piece of foam insulation approximately 1.67 pounds and roughly the size of a briefcase, breaking off the external tank's left bipod ramp. The foam struck Columbia's left wing leading edge at a combined speed of approximately 545 miles per hour. The impact occurred at reinforced carbon panel number 8, on the wing's leading edge, the critical heat shield designed to protect the orbiter from 3,000 degrees temperature of atmospheric re-entry. NASA engineers reviewing the launch footage immediately recognized this as potentially serious. Foam strikes had occurred on previous missions, but this was the largest piece they'd ever seen separate, and it struck one of the most critical areas of the thermal protection system. But here's where the story takes its first tragic turn. Mission managers, facing intense schedule pressure and dealing with normalized deviance from years of foam strikes that hadn't caused mission failures, made a fatal decision. They classified the foam strike as a turnaround issue, meaning something to inspect after landing, not an in-flight emergency. While Columbia's crew conducted their experiments in orbit, completely unaware of any problem, a group of engineers at NASA began what would become an increasingly desperate attempt to assess the damage and convince management to take action. Rodney Roca, a structural engineer with NASA's debris assessment team, led the effort to understand what the foam strike might have done to Columbia's wing. His team ran computer simulations, analyzed the impact footage frame by frame, and compared it to previous foam strike incidents. Their conclusion was deeply troubling. The foam strike likely caused significant damage to the reinforced carbon panels or the thermal tiles surrounding them. If the thermal protection system was breached, superheated plasma would enter the wing structure during re-entry, causing catastrophic structural failure. Roca's team formally requested that the Department of Defense use spy satellites or ground-based telescopes to photograph Columbia's wing during the mission. These images could definitely show if there was damage or how severe it might be. But here's where organizational culture failures became critical. Mission management rejected the image request 3 times. Their reasoning: they believed that even if damage was confirmed, nothing could be done to fix it. The crew had no repair capabilities for reinforced carbon panels, and there was no rescue shuttle ready for launch. The decision represented a fundamental failure in risk management. Without definitive knowledge of the damage, management couldn't make informed decisions about potential rescue operations, emergency landing procedures, or even warning the crew to prepare for a potential disaster. Engineering emails during this period reveal increasing frustration and concern. One engineer wrote, "We are continuing to look at the damage to the left wing. The foam strike was like shooting a cannonball at the wing. This is the wrong forum to discuss our concerns, but I wanted to make sure you knew about the analysis work going on." The organizational culture at NASA had evolved to prioritize schedule adherence and cost control over safety concerns. Middle management, fearful of being labeled as not team players or causing schedule delays, filtered concerns rather than escalating them. Engineers who raised safety issues were sometimes marginalized or ignored. To understand what happened during Columbia's final minutes, we need to examine the brutal physics of atmospheric re-entry at hypersonic speeds. When a spacecraft returns from orbit, it's traveling at approximately 17,500 miles per hour, 25 times the speed of sound. At these speeds, air molecules can't move out of the way fast enough. They compress in front of the vehicle, creating a shock wave and heating the air to plasma temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. This is why shuttle thermal protection is so critical. Without it, the aluminum structure would melt within seconds. Columbia's reinforced carbon panels on the wing's leading edge were designed to withstand these extreme temperatures. These panels were composite materials, layers of carbon fiber fabric impregnated with carbon resin, then coated with silicon carbide for oxidation protection. But when the foam struck panel 8 during launch, it created a breach approximately 6 to 10 inches in diameter, a seemingly small hole that would prove catastrophic. During re-entry, superheated plasma at 3,000 plus degrees began flowing through the breach into the wing's internal structure. The aluminum honeycomb structure inside the wing began melting immediately. Plasma eroded mounting brackets, consumed wiring bundles, and progressively destroyed the wing's structural integrity from the inside out. The crew had no indication that anything was wrong. The damage was occurring in areas with no sensors or instrumentation. At 8:53 a.m. Eastern Time, as Columbia descended through 243,000 feet altitude, the first sensor failure began. Temperature sensors in the left wing started showing unusual readings, then failed completely. Tire pressure sensors in the left main landing gear showed a gradual pressure increase as heat penetrated the wheel well. Mission Control in Houston started noticing anomalies but initially attributed them to sensor malfunction rather than actual structural damage. The crew was informed of tire pressure sensor readings but told not to worry about them. At 8:59 a.m., more sensors began failing in rapid succession. The hydraulic systems powering flight control surfaces started experiencing pressure fluctuations. The orbiter's flight computers were detecting increased drag on the left side and automatically commanding right-wing adjustments to maintain altitude. At 8:59:32 a.m., Columbia was over California, descending through 227,000 feet at Mach 23. The crew was preparing for landing at Kennedy Space Center, going through their pre-landing checklists, completely unaware that their spacecraft was disintegrating around them. The last complete crew transmission came at 8:59:32 a.m. Mission Commander Rick Husband acknowledged a radio call from Mission Control. The transmission was cut off mid-sentence. That incomplete word would be the last communication ever received from Columbia. At that moment, over Texas and Louisiana, the structural failure cascaded beyond any point of recovery. The left wing's internal structure had been so severely damaged that aerodynamic forces literally tore it apart. Without the left wing generating lift, Columbia became uncontrollable. Witness reports from across Texas describe Columbia breaking up in a spectacular fireball, leaving multiple contrails across the sky as debris fell over a 2,000 square mile area. The crew cabin remained briefly intact, but experienced forces beyond human survivability as the orbiter tumbled out of control at hypersonic speeds. The orbiter disintegrated completely. What had been a 100-ton spacecraft just seconds earlier became thousands of pieces of debris, some as small as bolts and washers, others as large as sections of the fuselage and payload bay doors. At Mission Control, the mood shifted from mild concern to drawing horror as telemetry was lost completely and multiple observers in Texas reported seeing the shuttle break up. Flight controllers continued calling Columbia, hoping against hope for a response that would never come. Within minutes, NASA leadership was notified. Within hours, the devastating confirmation: all 7 crew members had perished. Columbia was gone, and NASA's shuttle program, already under scrutiny since the 1986 Challenger disaster, faced its darkest day in nearly 2 decades. The 7 astronauts lost that day were Commander Rick Husband, pilot Willie McCool, mission specialists Kapalena Chawa, David Brown, Laurel Clark, Michael Anderson, and payload specialist Ian Ramon of Israel, the first Israeli astronaut. They died doing what they loved, advancing human knowledge through scientific research in space. The Columbia Accident Investigation Board, led by Harold Gaiman, launched the most comprehensive accident investigation in NASA history. Over 7 months, investigators recovered 84,000 pieces of debris, conducted extensive testing, and interviewed hundreds of NASA personnel. But the investigation went far deeper than just the technical cause. The CIAB report revealed that the foam problem had been known for years and that NASA had developed a culture of normalized deviance, accepting foam strikes as routine rather than treating each one as a serious anomaly. Investigators discovered that the foam had been shedding from external tanks since the very first shuttle flights. Over 65 previous shuttle missions had experienced foam debris strikes. NASA engineers had repeatedly raised concerns about foam shedding, but management consistently classified the events as in-family, meaning within acceptable risk parameters. The investigation also exposed that workplace culture issues at NASA had led to the disaster. Schedule pressure, budget constraints, and a hierarchical organizational structure prevented safety concerns from reaching decision-makers. Engineers who raised alarms were often ignored or told to prove the danger rather than management proving the safety. One of the most damning findings, NASA management had rejected 3 separate requests to use Department of Defense assets to photograph Columbia's wing during the mission. If those images had been obtained, the damage would have been visible and potential rescue operations could have been explored. Could Columbia's crew have been saved? The investigation concluded that rescue might not have been possible. NASA had shuttled Atlantis in processing for the next mission. With extraordinary effort, Atlantis might have been ready to launch within 15 to 20 days with an all-out emergency effort. It would have been incredibly risky and unprecedented, but it might have saved 7 lives. The Columbia disaster fundamentally transformed NASA's approach to human spaceflight safety. The changes implemented after 2003 represent the most comprehensive safety overhaul in the agency's history. First, NASA grounded the remaining fleet of 3 shuttles for over 2 years while comprehensive safety reviews were conducted and modifications were implemented. Every aspect of the shuttle operation was scrutinized and improved. The most visible change was the implementation of on-orbit inspection capabilities. Every subsequent shuttle mission included the orbiter boom sensor system, a 50-foot robotic arm extension equipped with laser scanners and high-resolution cameras that could inspect every inch of the thermal protection system in unprecedented detail. When shuttles docked with the International Space Station, they performed the rendezvous pitch maneuver, a backflip that allowed station astronauts to photograph the orbiter's heat shield. If damage was detected, crew members could perform spacewalks with repair techniques specifically developed after Columbia. External tank foam shedding problems were addressed through redesigned ramps, improved application techniques, and extensive testing. The bipod ramp, where Columbia's fatal foam originated, was completely eliminated from the tank design. Perhaps most importantly, NASA's organizational culture underwent significant transformation. The agency implemented new communication protocols ensuring that engineering concerns could bypass management chains and reach senior leadership directly. Safety became an overriding priority, not something balanced against schedule and cost. The concept of normalized deviance, accepting anomalies as routine, was directly addressed. Every foam strike, every anomaly, every deviation from expected performance became a serious investigation rather than an accepted occurrence. These changes meant that when the shuttle program ended in 2011, the remaining 22 missions after Columbia were conducted with unprecedented safety awareness. Not a single mission was lost, and the shuttle program concluded on NASA's terms rather than due to another disaster. Columbia's legacy extends far beyond the Space Shuttle program. The lessons learned from this tragedy have been incorporated into every human spaceflight program developed since 2003. When NASA developed the Commercial Crew Program with SpaceX and Boeing, Columbia's lessons informed every requirement. Crew Dragon and Starliner both feature abort capabilities throughout ascent, something the shuttle lacked. Thermal protection systems are designed with significant safety margins and comprehensive inspection capabilities. The Artemis program returning humans to the moon incorporates Columbia's organizational lessons. Safety concerns have direct paths to program leadership. Schedule pressure is not allowed to override engineering judgment. Every anomaly is treated as potentially flight critical until proven otherwise. Perhaps most significantly, Columbia taught the aerospace community that organizational culture is as critical as engineering excellence. You can have the best technology in the world, but if the organization doesn't listen to its engineers, doesn't escalate safety concerns, and normalize deviance from standards, disaster becomes inevitable. Every February 1st, NASA observes a day of remembrance for Columbia's crew alongside the crews of Challenger and Apollo 1. These solemn ceremonies ensure that the hard lessons purchased with astronauts' lives are never forgotten. What really happened in Space Shuttle Columbia? A 1.67-pound piece of foam insulation struck the wrong piece at the wrong angle, creating a breach that doomed the orbiter and its crew 16 days before disaster struck? But the deeper truth is that the organizational failures, normalized deviance, and schedule pressure created the conditions where the foam strike became fatal. 7 astronauts paid the ultimate price for lessons that NASA should have learned after Challenger. But their sacrifice wasn't in vain. Columbia's legacy is safer spaceflight for everyone who follows. If this deep dive into Columbia's tragedy and NASA's transformation helped you understand what really happened, hit that like button and subscribe to Project Aerospace for more technical analysis of major aerospace events. What aerospace topic would you like us to investigate next? Let us know in the comments. Remember Columbia's crew: Rick Husband, Willie McCool, Michael Anderson, Kapalana Chawla, David Brown, Laurel Clark, and Ian Ramon. They flew for all of us, and their legacy continues enduring that spaceflight becomes safer for those who follow. Until next time, this is Project Aerospace.